Welcome to the Reducing Insurance Journal. This is the data edition. This is a weekly e-journal brought directly to your inbox. To subscribe, visit ridjournal.com. In today's issue, we are going to explore the topic, professional analytics your mama didn't tell you about. I love that topic. You can also listen to us as a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast tool. If you like video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, ridjournal.com. I'm Ben Tuine, your host for today's edition, and let's dive right into it. My guest today is, I would call him sort of a legend in the dental industry, a friend, somebody who's been around in the accounting, CPA, key performance indicator side of the dental industry for a long, long time. My good friend, Rick Wilford. Rick, great to have you on today.
Yes, sir. Glad to be here.
I think yours is a name that's familiar to a lot of people, with your daughter out there as well as, running her CPA firm. Every time I go to the South, both of your names come up quite a bit, but even out here in the West, in Utah, and, rubbing shoulders with a lot of the CPAs out here, it seems like you've been a mentor to many throughout the industry, particularly the CPAs and the doctors out there that have an interest in looking at key performance indicators and other things about their business. How did you get started in this whole world, Rick, in terms of becoming a CPA?
Well, I actually have an electrical engineering degree from Georgia Tech.
Awesome.
And I was in what they call a co-op program, where you back then work for 3 months, go to school 3 months, work for 3 months, etc. And so that was a fascinating way to put yourself through school and get a little internship along the way. And about the junior year of engineering school, they stopped talking English and started talking mathematics and equations. And I realized, I'm not sure I want to be an engineer, but I was too far down the road. And I realized somehow in the back of my mind, I thought I wanted to own a business of some kind. And engineers normally don't, maybe a heating and an air conditioning company or something like that. But for the most part, they don't. So I went off to the Navy for a couple of years, communications officer on a destroyer. While I was there, the captain threw this book at me and said, young man, you are the youngest officer on the ship. You are now the treasurer of the officers' mess. And I said, yes, sir. And I opened the book. And there were 2 columns in there. One column was called debit and one column was called credit. I'd heard of credit cards, but what the heck is a debit? Engineers don't learn that kind of stuff. So I went and got a bookkeeping book, and that was kind of fascinating. And so I came back out of the Navy, went and got a 2-year MBA at Georgia State University. And I specialized sort of in accounting because I realized accounting is like the engineering of the business world. Mm-hmm. All the major consultants, certainly back before computers, actually had an accounting background as they were helping industry. Now, a lot of them would have, of course, computer backgrounds as well, or instead. And so I just lucked up that one of the local dental supply companies hired me to set up all of their dentists that they set up. And over a number of years, I accidentally became an expert in dental offices. Mm-hmm. And as we went along, a typical CPA, their job, you think of, is to whittle your income down as low as possible, cut your overhead, and pay as little in income taxes as possible. Well, I was always weird. In addition to that, if a client came in and his records or computers showed he had $1 million in revenue, I would always wonder, where did the $1 million come from?
Right.
Could that have been 1.3 million if he worked at it? Mm-hmm. And so for many, many years, 30 plus years, I hung around with people like the Academy of Dental Management Consultants, people like that, who are frankly a lot more fun to hang around than a bunch of CPAs. But I had a lot of friends on the consulting side, not just the income tax side. Mm-hmm. And so actually I stole a lot of ideas from them. And so when Kate bought the CPA practice from me about 6 or 7 years ago, I dusted off my electrical engineering degree and souped up what we had internally called Denometrics, a raw version of that. And we came up with this program, and it's unique. We say it's the best analytics that you can't buy. And by that, I mean, we're not anxious to sell it to the typical mom and pop dentist. We frankly go primarily through consultants, dental CPAs, sophisticated practice administrators, things like that, but not just every, mom and pop dentist, because they wouldn't know what to do with the data that we have there.
Right. No, that's interesting. Well, you certainly have years and years and years of experience in this whole world of numbers, right? Tax and accounting and all that. And I love this topic that we selected, professional analytics your mama didn't tell you about. And I'd love to dive right into it here, Rick. You're interesting. Your background is so interesting that each of the questions that I prepared, I'm excited to hear these answers. But the first one I have for you, Rick, is, I understand that how one uses analytics depends a lot on the style of practice they have. What do you mean? What can you provide some clarity to that by what that means?
Yeah, I was at a recent meeting, the Academy of Dental Group Practice, and I told the group before we dove in, it says, you're at a fork in the road. You either have a practice that's busy or you have a practice that's productive. And generally not both. It's one or the other. Now, sometimes you have a practice in the middle, but on the busy side, if you're eating up with PPOs and you've got 12 operatories and yourself and 3 or 4 associates, you've got to be busy. You can't get picky. You can't slow it down. So I'd say per patient, per hour, you're oftentimes not very productive.
Right.
On the other end of the spectrum, if you slow it down and you're doing more fee for service, and that's a topic that you guys love to talk about, is getting out of these PPO plans, taking back control of your practice, then your productivity per hour skyrockets, your quality of life is much better, et cetera. I'm happy to share my thoughts there with you guys too, although that's primarily your area. But I say there is a hybrid in the middle. And that is, if you're smart enough, you've got the 12 operatories, you're one owner, and somehow you found 3 or 4 young associates who were willing to work for peanuts, if you will, that the PPO will pay and allow you to pay. Let them do a lot of the PPO kind of procedures, with your strategy being like a specialist. They feed all the big crown and bridge implants, et cetera, to you, the owner doctor. You're sort of the tip of the pyramid, and almost like a multi-level marketing scheme. You're doing great, but I'd hate to be one of the 3 or 4 associates down the galley pulling on the oars. And if you were, let's say, a practice with 3 owners and each of you is expected to be pulling on those PPO oars, I'd rather slash my wrist. But the things you would look at, volume versus productivity, would differ widely. And if you've got a lot of PPOs and you're booked out with junk in your schedule 6 months in advance, you don't really have much room to wiggle or time to fiddle with trying to improve things. It's sort of like trying to eat soup with a fork.
Right. Right. No, that's interesting, Rick. I know that the conversations that you and I have had in the past, every practice is different. You have single doctor offices, you have group practices, like what you said, you have general dentists that will only do cosmetics or implants. So they use their associates to feed them production, right? Feed them those higher dollar cases. So, and I know that you're pretty leery about averages and benchmarks. Can you kind of dive into that a little bit as to why you kind of believe that the averages and benchmarks isn't something that can be easily applied to every, like a one size fits all?
Yeah. The problem I have, if somebody, let's say the American Dental Association, comes out and says the average doctor produces $300 an hour. Well, first of all, where did they get that data? Typically, it's everybody volunteering to send in their information. What do they mean by production? Do they mean UCR, standard fee production, like it was 30 or so years ago? Or mean net PPO production, and a lot of offices, that's what they put into their system nowadays, which frankly saves them a lot of bookkeeping. Every time the EOB comes in, they don't have to make those big write-offs maybe. Or some combination of both. So there's no such thing anymore as pure gross production.
Right.
And so the first thing that scares me is you've got a mishmash of fee-for-only service practices. You've got some Medicaid practices. You've got some DMO practices in there. You've got high-end cosmetic practice. You've got a mess. And when we look at the data, we will in fact see a range of doctors producing between $175 on the low end of the spectrum and $800 on the high end of the spectrum. What good did knowing an average of $400 do?
Right.
It's sort of like if you put your feet in the oven and your head in the refrigerator, on average, you feel pretty good.
Yeah.
But that doesn't tell your feet and your head much, right? And so that's why we really, really only want to work with a sophisticated practice administrator or primarily dental CPAs, practice management consultants, to be able to interpret this information so you don't feel like you're drinking from a fire hydrant. What should these benchmarks and averages be for your practice, not in general?
That's a really great answer. Customization, right? Everybody's different. Every practice could be different. Every individual could be different, right?
Right.
So you need to look at your own individual situation and customize your analytics according to your style of dentistry and your style of how you run the business, and which makes perfect sense. You know, Rick, you think of the quantitative world of analytics to be held up by three different pillars, you know, those being patients, production, and profits. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, that's where I like to organize the KPIs, the monetary part, the quantitative things we can measure into those three P's: patients, production, and profits. But I quickly add, there's another 4P out there, which is probably most important of all, and that's the P called people. But they aren't so quantifiable. One end of the spectrum to the other, remember the longest distance in the practice is the 7 or 8 inches between the doctor's ears, right?
Yeah.
Attitude, leadership or lack thereof, philosophy, et cetera, personality styles, where the bodies are buried, why won't the front work with the back, how come Susie doesn't work with anybody? I can't quantify that. I can show you the end results, but that hand-holding, warm, fuzzy part is vital also. As a bean counter, I'm more in the quantitative, but remember, and we tell the clients this all the time, remember 95% of your assets go home every night. You better hope they come back the next morning. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so if you have a lot of the warm fuzzy working, then the KPIs will look like they should.
That's pretty awesome.
So if you don't have patience, it all starts there. If you don't have patience, you don't have the ability to do production. But I don't just want a lot of patience. I want a lot of the right kind of patience. And I don't mean to sound elitist, but what I mean is I want to have patients who are aligned with your clinical philosophy. I have people that purposely run a Medicaid practice. They're having a ball. I ask them, well, what kind of dental software do you use? They say, well, I don't have any dental software. Well, how do you track your schedule? Oh, we don't keep a schedule. It's just like a clinic, first come, first serve. Well, how do you track the hygiene department? Well, we don't have any hygienists. We don't clean teeth. Once in a rare while, my patients don't want their teeth cleaned. They're kind of pain motivated, in and out, that type of thing. And so there's no real practice management done here. The big plus is the only computer, you might call it, is this black box Medicaid gave me to submit my payments, and I get paid every month regularly on Friday. And so it's not fancy. The Hinman meeting won't come take a tour of my, cinder block office, but I'm doing pretty well financially, keeping it simple. So that's one end of the spectrum. That's what success means to him. Another person we have is trying to bust it for 6 months to make as much as he can, just with the sole purpose of being able to pay for his 6-month mission trip to Haiti every year.
Mhm.
That's success to him, not counting as much money as he can at all costs. And so we want to make sure that if you're going to do some crown and bridge and larger cases, things like that, if your attitude is to take care of your patient's mouth for the rest of their life, which means, and you'll have this discussion with them as you weed out who you want in your practice, that means, Mrs. Jones, if you concur that that's both our objectives, that means you need to come in twice a year for, a visit in the RIDJ program. It's not just coming to see the cleaning lady. We're also doing oral cancer screening and another couple of things, you could be mentioning to them. And if you have an emergency practice, frankly, which some guys do, they're open 24/7, big neon sign on the side of the building, emergency practice. You're not trying to set up a long-term relationship. A lot of one and done, a lot of emergencies, and that's another way to make a living. So there's a wide variety there. So the patients that are compatible, consistent with your style of practice. And we talk a lot about trying to triage those patients so the wrong patient doesn't cross your threshold and put you in an ethical dilemma where you wasted a lot of chair time and PPE supplies, and you knew it in the first 60 seconds that they weren't going to be a fit for your style of practice. You mentioned that a crown's $1,200, $1,500, and they turn white and say, "What?" Back on the expressway on the big billboard, Dr. Smith says he does crowns for $400. Well, that Dr. Smith probably doing pretty good crowns for that, but our crowns run $1,200 to $1,500. And such a person, you'd like to give an opportunity to vote themselves off the island, say.
Right.
They don't see value in what you're doing.
Mhm.
But they're getting value at $400. They don't
Mhm.
necessarily care for a $1,500 crown. Somebody else would throw up at a $400 crown. Not right nor wrong, not judging folks, but what's consistent with your office, your style. Like I ask folks, how's the dream coming? The dream you had when you were graduating from dental school, the kind of practice you thought you'd have, the respect you'd get from patients. How's that coming now, 10, 20 years later?
Mhm.
Do we need to do some changes to get back in alignment with that dream, or have you given up? We've got some practices so bad, maybe eaten up with PPOs, or the environment has changed around them, and within 5-mile radius, there's no economic basis there to do some fancy dentistry like maybe you used to do or want to do. And we did a demographics one time, and the guy came back and said, "Doctor, it's like you're trying to hang a chandelier in an outhouse.
Mhm.
Nobody wants, needs, appreciates, or can afford what you're doing." And we finally, at his age 58, I was proud of him. He up and moved his practice 12 miles to where all his patients had been moving to over the years that did appreciate his exquisite dentistry. So you
Mhm.
got those kinds of things to think about too before we get into measuring everything. Then the production would have to do with what kind of procedure are you doing? How fast do you do them? Which is back to the patients. What will they buy? Is that consistent with what you have to sell? And as some people say, if I want to buy what you're selling, why should I buy it from you?
Right.
So there comes some of your communication skills, quote, marketing with the patient to convince them you're the place. And that's why they're driving past 10 other offices to get to you. And then when I talk about profit, I'm talking about collecting, of course, what you produced, but I don't mean profit in the sense of your P&L that the CPA gives you, looking at your overhead, dental supplies, et cetera.
Mhm.
I mean, how good are you at getting your old-fashioned UCR fees to the bottom line? The biggest single expense in your office, if you're involved in PPOs, the biggest single expense is the $500,000 of reimbursement write-offs that
Mhm.
don't appear in your P&L. And that's the same thing Ben and the guys have been talking about. Get yourself into a better situation, take back control of your practice.
Absolutely. Preach there, Rick, preach.
Can I get an amen?
Yeah, amen. Rick, if you had only one analytic, what would that be? Or in other words, what's the mother of all KPIs?
Okay. It would not be, for instance, production per day. How can you go to your study club or the ADA or other surveys? How can you compare your production per day to the guy down the street? You don't know how many hours a day he works.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't tell us much. It's not production per hour. Well, again, how many chairs do the guys in the study club work at compared to you? How many hours do they really produce in 1 hour? If they're working out of 3 chairs, they better produce maybe 3 times more that you're producing, and you're working out of 1 chair. So that doesn't work. So the holy grail, the common denominator that we use to measure across all practices is your UCR, production per patient visit.
Yeah.
Now, you may not be tracking your UCR. We do, because we know your fee schedule for UCR, and we're constantly, frankly, rubbing your nose in it when you say you produce $50,000 with, I won't mention any names, but let's say it rhymes with Delta, and that's your net PPO fee. And I say, well, in the good old days, UCR, that would have been $100,000. You just left $50,000 on the table. And so if that's the way you intend to practice, I mean, that's up to you. But let's say you've got a guy next door who's fee for service. Let's say you collect $50,000. He collects $50,000 fee for service, but you have to produce $90,000 to collect $50,000. He collects roughly $50,000 to collect $50,000.
Right.
What do you think that does to your supply bill? The PPO guy, he goes to conferences that says, well, the average dental supply these days runs about 9.3%. I told this group at the Academy of Dental Group Practice, I said, gag me. The average dental supply cost of 6% you knew 30 and 40 years ago has not changed.
Right.
Maybe a little bit, Buyers Club, blah, blah. Hasn't changed. Don't give me this 9.3% junk. They're measuring it wrong. They're measuring it based on collections, not on UCR production. That's how we used to measure that. But keep in mind, if you take your dental cost and divide that by your UCR fee production, you're going to have 6%. You're getting lazy. Most of the accountants are lazy because QuickBooks is lazy. Typically, it's going to show you collections because that's what they use to do a tax return. But the more sophisticated CPAs will show you maybe production also, and they'll be smart enough to measure your overhead based on production. I can go either way because we're going to calculate it for you either way. And in fact, your dental supplies do run 9.3% of collections. Use that as your budget figure because you're using collections and you're doing PPOs, but don't walk around mad at your dental supply guy that he's, taking advantage of you. No, it's production that produces overhead and collections what pays it. You're just measuring it wrong. Measure it based on UCR. And so we use as our benchmark UCR production per patient visit so we can compare with all the guys in the study club. If your net production is a lot less than that, then that's a different issue to deal with, the PPOs, reimbursement, et cetera, but you're producing just as much as the fee-for-service guy down the street per hour, per patient visit. Your structure with the PPOs just doesn't let you collect it and get that to the bottom line. And so over time, you and Arun and me are trying to make these folks mad enough to say, hey, tell me more about how to change the way I'm practicing then. So that's what I mean by profit. I'm highlighting that huge 500,000 they left on the table and that they're not thinking of. And they're all saying, well, Rick, I couldn't have had that 500,000 anyway. And I'm saying, poppycock, if you work with Ben and the guys, you'll find that historically, if you do it properly, spend time, they've got good programming to do this. After about 9 months or a year of communications, you drop the PPO plans. And my friend Art Wiederman likes to say, don't use that language. Tell people that we have changed our relationship with the insurance company. Sounds a little classier. But a year later, consistently, we find about 81% of those patients are still with you.
Wow.
And your production per patient visit has skyrocketed.
Mm-hmm.
And the 19% of the patients that you lost between you and me, do you miss any of them? Those probably aren't the patients that you really, really wanted, because they only came to you because you have Delta. The fact is, people are already driving past you, hopefully, or past 10 other offices to come to you because they like you. They like your staff.
Mm-hmm.
They like the work you've done. They trust you. Trust is the key that the big box boys can't replicate.
Right. Right.
Trust is what you're selling. And so if you happen to have Delta, well, they'll certainly use it. They're not stupid, but they're not coming to you because you have Delta.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's where you want to perhaps substitute maybe an in-house membership plan, maybe just across the board 10% discount if they are in your quote smile club, which means they have to come twice a year through the RIDJ to stay in the smile club and that type of thing. But the bottom line is your total production depends upon how many patient visits you have, and the quality of those patient visits reflects the other part of the equation that says, what is your production per patient visit?
That's
the big
awesome.
PPO guy may brag that he has 500 patient visits a month. I say, yeah, but you're only producing $3 per patient visit. Somebody else has 60 patient visits per month, but they're producing $2,000 per patient visit. That's where the rubber hits the road. And all these other pieces, including that intangible people pillar, will shine and show that you're making success.
That's awesome, Rick. What a great answer to the mother of all KPIs. I honestly didn't know the answer. When I was anxious to hear what you had to say there. So for our listeners, as you can tell, Rick, I mean, he's been around the block a number of times. He probably one of the brightest and smartest as it pertains to key performance indicators and all things analytics as it pertains to dental practices. So Rick, if people or listeners have questions or want to pick your brain and learn more about your expertise in the dental industry, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, the easiest way is to email me at Rick, R-I-C-K, at dentametrics.com. I'll spell that, DENTAmetrix.com, or they can go to the website by the same name. And there we have 4 open self-paced demos. I always hate on the internet when I go to a nice website and I'd like to get a demo, and all of a sudden you have to give them the name of your firstborn, a lock of hair, your address, and things like that. And they will then call to set up a meeting to give you a demo and say, wait a minute, I don't even know if I want to waste that much time on you yet. I'm not after a marketing call. And so we put 4 videos on there that tells you the whole story. You don't have to sign up for anything. And if you don't think it's a fit, end of conversation. If you think it's a fit, there's certainly a contact link, or come to the Rick at dentametrics.com. But love to see if you think there's a fit, and we'll talk about how sophisticated is your practice administrator. We don't want you to walk off 3 months from now saying, oh goodness, I was like drinking from a fire hydrant. We're not a fit for everybody. We are a professional strength analytics, next generation. Unlike most of the others out there, they're pretty, and I call them kind of retail programs. We're a professional strength for professionals. professional practice managers like ADOM folks or consultants, practice administrators, dental CPAs, DSOs. We're designed from the ground up to deal with multi-locations. So we're not tacking that on as an add-on. So we can handle everything out there. We work with Dentrix, EagleSoft, and Open Dental, by the way.
That's amazing. So you kind of alluded to what we want to talk about on the next episode. So, most guests are thinking right now, they want to hear more from Rick. First time I spoke to Rick, I just wanted to learn more and more and more. So to our guests, we'll carve out a number of different episodes to bring Rick back on to do a series to talk about different things, analytics, but also to showcase and feature his analytics program and dive deeper into some of the numbers and the things that he recommends practice owners should be paying attention to. Rick, it's always a pleasure talking to you. And it's like, most days I just want to have you speak, hit record, have you talk, and then we can create a book out of that. Because you not only have great stories, but you just have such a great delivery. But more importantly, you have a lot of experience in this area. So I want to personally thank you for being willing to be on our podcast and also agreeing to do a series with us, which we'll post more episodes about here in the future. So thank you again, Rick, for being on our podcast today.
Let's go make some success together and get your clients happy.
Absolutely. So to our guests and our listeners, if you love what we do here at ridjournal.com, we ask you to tell your friends, tell your family members who are in dentistry, share a review on iTunes or YouTube, but also don't forget to subscribe. If you are a dental speaker or a leader in a dental organization, don't forget to check out ridexperts.org. Until we meet again, my name is Ben Tuyene, your host of this episode.